Hello, everyone. Tonight we are going to talk about something that lives quietly inside the bones, something that doesn't shout but sighs with every step. Imagine this, 4 a.m., and I'm standing barefoot in the hallway, gripping the wall like it's a lifeline. Not because I'm lost, but because I'm afraid my left knee will betray me again. You probably won't survive this story if you're expecting a miracle cure. Spoiler alert, there isn't one. But there is something else. Something slower, deeper, and a little more golden. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Drop me your country and your local time in the comments. I actually read those. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. It began innocently enough, a faint pinch in my left knee whenever I bent down to pick up something or climb the porch steps. It wasn't pain, not really, just a twinge, like my joint was clearing its throat. But you know how the small things always seem to carry the biggest warnings? At first, I shrugged it off. I was 74 at the time. My doctor said cartilage wears out like kitchen sponges, quietly and without apology. A few months later, my right knee started copying its sibling. Then my hips chimed in like a Greek chorus, and finally my hands followed, stiff and reluctant, especially in the mornings. I remember one day trying to twist open a jar of jam. It wasn't sealed tight, but it may as well have been the vault at the Royal Mint. I had to use a towel, curse twice under my breath, and finally surrender it to the neighbor's son. He opened it like it was air. "You all right?" he asked. "Just tired," I said, which was technically true, but not in the way he meant. The thing is, pain, when it's chronic, has a sneaky personality. It doesn't crash into your life. It creeps. It trickles. And by the time you realize how much it's taken, it's already moved in and changed the locks. I stopped going on walks I used to enjoy, started declining invitations because it's too cold today, or maybe next week. Lies, all of it. The truth was, I didn't trust my legs, didn't trust the floor, or the stairs, or even the wind sometimes. Sleep. That became a weird science experiment. My mattress had more pillows than a furniture store, all strategically arranged to prop up different joints like I was an exhibit. 2 hours of uninterrupted sleep was a victory. 3, a miracle. I began measuring my nights and how many positions I tried before giving up and staring at the ceiling like it had answers. Old school wisdom says, if you ignore the pain, it'll go away. Which is funny because the opposite is usually true. Ignoring pain is like ignoring a cat. It only makes it more determined to sit on your chest. One particularly sharp night, I sat alone in the kitchen sipping lukewarm chamomile tea and caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked like a tired ghost wearing my old pajamas. Not dramatic, just faded. That's the part no one talks about. Chronic pain doesn't just take your body. It borrows your joy, misplaces your confidence, and shreds your calendar until nothing sounds appealing anymore. My hands were starting to feel like little lock boxes every morning. I'd wake up, open and close them slowly, and they'd creak like floorboards in an abandoned house. Buttoning shirts became a tiny battle. Cutting fruit? I gave up and started buying pre-sliced like a lazy teenager. An odd fact, did you know humans share the same basic hand bone structure as bats? They just use it better. Made me laugh when I read that, imagining a bat judging me while I fumbled to screw the cap on my arthritis cream. Doctors were helpful, don't get me wrong, but after the third or fourth visit, their eyebrows stopped moving when I described the pain. They'd nod, type something into the computer, prescribe another anti-inflammatory. Try this gel, stretch more, hot water bottle. I did all of it, religiously, and still every day felt like Groundhog Day, but with joint pain. There's an ongoing academic debate about whether pain memory exists, if the body remembers pain even after it's gone. I think it does. My muscles would flinch at motions that never hurt that day, but had once, as if my own body was gaslighting me with muscle memory. Pain teaches you to avoid things, and over time, you avoid joy along with them. And that's how the years passed. Not all bad, not all bleak, but always a little slower. Always carrying that dull echo in my bones, a rhythm that followed me like background music I couldn't turn off. I didn't stop living, but I did start shrinking. My world got smaller, my days got quieter, until one day someone lit a match in that darkness. And oddly enough, it started with a phone call. I wasn't expecting anything when the phone rang that Thursday afternoon. The sky outside was gray in that typical Canadian way. Moody, undecided, like it was considering rain but hadn't committed. I shuffled over to the receiver, muttering to my knees to behave. On the line was Helen, my niece, who calls at least once a week just to make sure I haven't fused with the couch, as she jokes. She always asks how I'm feeling, and I always say fine, which we both know is code for don't worry about me. But this time, I let something slip. I told her about waking up 3 times the night before because I couldn't find a position that didn't feel like lying on gravel. Told her my hands had refused to hold a spoon that morning. That was a new one. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Uncle, have you tried turmeric?" Now, I'll be honest. My first reaction wasn't gratitude, it was suspicion. Turmeric? The spice I used once for a butter chicken recipe that stained my favorite wooden spoon? I almost laughed. I mean, this wasn't a cooking problem. It was a cartilage and nerves and painkillers problem. But Helen is persistent in the most loving way. She said, "Just look into it. Promise me." I sighed and promised. What else was I going to do? Run a marathon instead? That evening, I sat down at the computer, surrounded by a pile of unopened mail and a half-eaten banana. I typed turmeric for joint pain and pressed enter. What popped up surprised me. Not blogs from wellness influencers trying to sell $80 jars of golden magic, but actual research, studies, doctors, hospitals. And what's more, none of them claimed it was a miracle. They used words like adjunct, natural aid, anti-inflammatory properties. Sounded reasonable, sounded real. The key compound is called curcumin. Apparently, it works by targeting the same molecular pathways as some over-the-counter pain meds, just without the stomach erosion. It's like nature's version of ibuprofen, only with fewer commercial breaks. There was one quote from a rheumatologist that stuck with me. He said, "Turmeric isn't a cure, but it's one of the best natural options we have for low-grade chronic inflammation." That sentence lived in my head all night. It wasn't promising magic. It was promising support, like a cane for your cells. Now here's something odd I found during my rabbit hole. Curcumin isn't well absorbed by the body unless it's taken with black pepper. Apparently, black pepper contains something called piperine, and piperine is the buddy system for curcumin. Without it, most of the curcumin just passes through you like a bad movie on Netflix. I also read a story from a woman in Nova Scotia who swore by her turmeric tea. She'd taken it every day for a year and said she now knits again without pain. That caught my attention more than the science. Not because she knits, I can't thread a needle to save my life, but because she had found something. And I wanted that, not the tea, the hope. There's an open academic debate on whether natural remedies work via chemical impact or psychological reinforcement. In other words, is it the spice or the belief that does the work? Honestly, I didn't care. If my pain goes from an 8 to a 5 because of a placebo, great. That's 3 fewer groans a day and a bonus smile at breakfast. I went to the pantry. There it was, behind a jar of dried bay leaves that had fossilized sometime during the Harper administration. My neglected bottle of turmeric. Still golden, still potent smelling. I opened it, and it made me sneeze twice. Promising. You know, old school wisdom tells us, don't expect the new to fix what age has broken. And maybe that's true. But sometimes it's not about fixing, it's about easing, about leaning a little less on pain, a little more on peace. The next morning, I wrote down a list of things I had tried in the past decade. Tylenol, naproxen, Voltaren, Inwanafurni, Mayuanorna, Wishons, acupuncture, massage therapy, copper bracelets, don't ask, arnica gel, Epsom salt baths, yoga videos hosted by a woman named Luna who looked like she'd never seen a wrinkle. None of them stuck. Some helped for a day or two. Some just made my wallet lighter. I kept trying because giving up felt worse than limping, but I realized something that night while watching the kettle boil. I wasn't just tired of pain. I was tired of trying. And yet here I was, again, willing to try one more thing. Not because I believed in turmeric, but because I believed in Helen. Sometimes it's not the remedy that works. It's the person who offers it. That night I stood at the stove, turmeric jar in one hand, oat milk in the other, and thought, let's see what you've got, golden dust. There's a strange comfort in following a recipe. You don't have to think much, just measure, stir, pour, and wait. It's like a miniature act of faith, only with ingredients instead of prayers. That's how I felt the first time I stood over the stove, holding that teaspoon of turmeric in one hand, like it was some sacred relic, and squinting at my phone for the steps. I decided to keep it simple. No exotic ingredients, no blenders or frothers or imported Himalayan yak milk. Just what I had in the kitchen. Oat milk, a tiny spoon of turmeric, a pinch of black pepper, a dab of coconut oil, and a smidge of fresh ginger. I didn't even peel the ginger properly, just shaved off the dusty bits and grated the rest with an old cheese grater. I added everything into a small saucepan and put it over low heat. No distractions, no TV, no radio, no phone calls from extended relatives wanting to sell me essential oils. Just me, the wooden spoon, and a suspiciously yellow mixture gently steaming in the pan. The scent filled the kitchen quickly. Earthy, peppery, a little like old wood soaked in tea. Not unpleasant, just unusual. Like something that belonged in an apothecary rather than a kitchen. The milk shimmered as it warmed, and for a few quiet minutes, I felt like I was making a potion. And in a way, I was. Old school wisdom says, what you make with your hands will serve your heart. I'd heard that one from my grandmother. She used to make herbal tonics that tasted like punishment, but somehow worked better than anything from a store. This felt a little like that, like a gentle rebellion against passivity. When it was ready, I strained it through an old tea filter, because let's be honest, no one wants to chew their bedtime drink. I poured it into my favorite mug, the one with the chipped rim and faded maple leaf. Took a sip. Warm, spicy, oddly soothing. The ginger danced, the turmeric hummed, and the pepper kicked just enough to remind you it was there on purpose. I didn't expect fireworks. I didn't even expect results. I just wanted something to do besides rearrange my pill organizer for the third time that week. Later that night, as I sipped my golden drink slowly, almost ceremonially, I realized I'd found something unexpected. A moment. A pause in the noise. For once, I wasn't bracing for the next shot of pain or calculating how many hours until my next dose. I was just there, present, tasting something new, doing something for myself, something I hadn't done in a long time. Odd fact of the night, turmeric stains are nearly impossible to remove from white countertops. Learned that one the hard way. My left index finger was still slightly yellow for 3 days. My niece said it made me look like I'd been playing cards with Big Bird. There's an academic debate on whether the ritual itself, preparing something with care and attention, can actually lower pain perception. Some scientists believe that intention matters, that our brains respond not only to what we consume, but how we consume it. Maybe that's why the microwave version tasted like defeat. The stovetop, though, that tasted like effort. Like I was telling my body, hey, I'm still here. I still care. After I finished the cup, I rinsed the pan and went to bed with a strange sort of hopefulness. Not wild optimism, just a soft hum in my chest. I didn't sleep any longer than usual, but I remember that night differently. I wasn't fighting my sheets or trying to twist my legs into positions that didn't exist. I just lay there, breathing, letting the warmth linger. By morning, nothing magical had happened. My knees still felt cranky. My fingers still protested the bathroom tap. But when I stepped outside to get the newspaper, I noticed something so small it almost escaped me. I wasn't limping quite as much. Just a little more fluidity, like my legs remembered how to work together. I stood at the top of the steps for a second, one hand on the railing, wondering, did that turmeric thing do something? Maybe yes, maybe no. But I made it again that night. Same cup, same motions. I even started looking forward to it, like a bedtime story for my joints. Funny how something so simple, a drink, a color, a scent, can become a kind of lifeline. Not because it fixes you, but because it gives you one small thing to look forward to when most of your day is built around avoiding what hurts. It wasn't just golden milk anymore. It was a golden moment, a warm defiance in a world that tells people my age to just accept it. But what if I didn't want to? The fourth night was when I truly noticed something had shifted. Not drastically. I didn't leap out of bed or break into a sprint around the backyard. But something subtle, something almost quiet inside me, eased. It was like my body had stopped yelling and started whispering. By this point, the turmeric drink had become a kind of ceremony. I wasn't just heating up milk and adding a few spices. I was reclaiming part of my evening. I'd start around 9:30 p.m. after the dishes were done and the house had settled into its usual nighttime hush. I liked hearing the soft clink of the spoon against the pot, the way the steam curled like a question mark above the mug, the gentle burn of ginger rising through the air. That night, I stood by the kitchen window while the mixture warmed and looked out at the empty street. A single moth bumped clumsily against the porch light. Somewhere, someone's sprinkler was ticking away like a metronome. Life goes on, I thought, even when your joints don't. I drank my cup slower than usual, trying to listen more carefully to how it felt going down. I know that sounds ridiculous, but when you've lived with pain for over a decade, you become oddly tuned into your body's rhythms. That night, there was a softness in my shoulders that hadn't been there before, like someone had turned down the volume just a notch. By the time I went to bed, the usual routine of tossing, turning, adjusting, and swearing was still present, but a little less urgent. I found a position that didn't feel like lying on a pile of rocks, and I actually fell asleep without counting ceiling tiles. When I woke the next morning, it took me a few minutes to realize what was different. I didn't have to brace myself before getting out of bed. Usually, I had to do this weird ritual of swinging my legs slowly to the side, sitting up gradually, massaging my knees while praying they didn't scream. But this time, I just stood up. Not perfectly, not pain-free, but not terrified either. Old school wisdom says, when the storm quiets, don't ask why, just walk. That morning, I did just that. I walked to the bathroom without clutching the wall. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself coffee like a normal person, not a wounded animal. Later that afternoon, while folding laundry, I bent down to pick up a dropped sock and realized, mid-reach, that I'd done it without thinking. No hesitation, no grimace, just movement. I stood there for a second, sock in hand, grinning like a lunatic. I think I even said, "Well, I'll be damned," out loud, to the sock. That was the moment I began to believe, not in turmeric itself necessarily, but in the possibility that I wasn't doomed to a life of shrinking movements and muttered complaints, that my body, stubborn and creaky as it was, still had some spark left. Now, I'm not claiming turmeric turned me into an Olympic gymnast. Let's not get carried away. I still had stiffness, still needed to sit down after 20 minutes of gardening, but I no longer felt like I was losing. That relentless downward slide, the one that feels like gravity is stronger for people over 80, had slowed. There's this open academic debate about whether certain natural compounds work better in people who believe in them. The placebo effect, basically. But I think that theory misses something crucial. Belief isn't just about what you think, it's about what you do. I showed up for myself every night. I made the drink. I sat down. I sipped. And I waited. Maybe the turmeric helped. Maybe the act of self-care did. Probably both. One odd fact I stumbled on while reading up on this whole turmeric thing. In some cultures, turmeric is used in marriage rituals, not just food or medicine, but symbolism. It represents renewal, fertility, even joy. The idea of it being connected to life's bright beginnings made me laugh. Here I was, nearly 85, sipping it like some cranky wizard, hoping to resurrect my knees. Maybe I was in my own kind of ritual, one of recovery, not romance. By the end of that week, something else had changed too. Not just my joints, but my evenings. They felt calmer, more purposeful. Like I had a quiet appointment with myself every night. I started turning off the TV earlier, reading a bit before bed, even lighting a candle once, though that felt slightly dramatic. I was transforming my routine, not because anyone told me to, but because it felt good. I think that's what people forget about getting older. We're still capable of change. We're just slower at trusting it. That fourth night, I looked in the mirror. Not the usual rushed, avoid eye contact glance, but a real look. I saw someone tired, yes, but also someone doing something new. Someone who hadn't given up. And I gave myself a little nod. Okay, I whispered. Let's see where this goes. By now, the recipe wasn't just part of my nightly routine. It was my favorite part. I never thought I'd say that about anything that involved turmeric, a spice I once accused of tasting like colored dirt. But here we were, every night, without fail, I lined up the same ingredients on the counter like I was performing a tiny ritual. It didn't require much. 1 level teaspoon of turmeric, a pinch of black pepper, never skipped, Helen warned me, a cup of unsweetened oat milk, half a teaspoon of coconut oil, and a smidge of freshly grated ginger. I'd warm everything in a saucepan over low heat, stirring with my old wooden spoon that had survived decades of soups, stews, and one ill-fated attempt at fudge. I'd never let it boil, just a gentle steam. The mixture would thicken slightly, taking on that deep golden color that looked like it belonged in a Renaissance painting or a sunset postcard from somewhere warmer than Toronto. Some nights I strained it, some nights I didn't bother. I liked the little bits of ginger, even if one got stuck in my teeth now and then. Small price to pay for peace. I know I mentioned it before, but if you're going to try this, don't forget the pepper. That stuff is like the secret handshake for curcumin. Without it, your body barely knows what to do with the turmeric. With it, absorption improves by something like 2,000%. It's wild science, man. Old school wisdom. Never trust a cure you can't make with your own hands. That one came from my grandfather, a man who once fixed a broken chair with 3 nails, a rag, and a boiled potato. I think he'd have appreciated this little recipe, even if he would have called it fancy soup. Anyway, once the mixture was ready, I'd pour it into the same mug, the one with the chip. You know how some things just feel better with age? That mug was one of them, like it had earned the right to carry something that might bring comfort. I usually drank it at the kitchen table with the lights dimmed. No distractions, just me, the drink, and whatever thoughts hadn't been aired out during the day. Sometimes I'd look out the window and watch the moon climb past the maple tree. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and let the warmth travel down to my belly, spreading outward like a slow, steady glow. It's funny how something as simple as a warm drink can give you back a piece of yourself. It wasn't about the turmeric alone. It was about the gesture, the decision to care for myself without expecting perfection. A small act of resistance against the numb routine of pills, ointments, and forgotten hopes. I stopped obsessing over results, stopped checking every morning for miracles. Instead, I paid attention to the smaller wins, like how I didn't groan getting out of the chair, or how I could carry a grocery bag without my shoulder whispering threats. My body wasn't suddenly young again, but it was beginning to cooperate. And in your 80s, that's all you want from your joints, basic cooperation. There's a phrase I read online, can't remember where, that said, relief doesn't roar, it hums. And that's exactly what it felt like. A hum, a gentle maybe where there used to be a hard no. Here's a weird side effect I wasn't expecting. My digestion improved. I wasn't aiming for that, but suddenly the bloat and discomfort I'd gotten used to after dinner started fading. I looked it up. Turns out turmeric can also support your gut health. Who knew? It was like this little yellow powerhouse was sneaking around inside me, fixing things on its own terms. There's ongoing academic debate about the systemic impact of curcumin, whether its effects are isolated or interconnected across inflammation-related systems. I can't speak for the scholars, but I can tell you this. I felt better. My hands were more flexible, my knees less sulky. Even my back, usually the ringleader of all complaints, was down to a dull murmur. Of course, I still had limits. I wasn't out tango dancing or rearranging furniture, but I was moving better, sleeping better, feeling possibility. That's the word. I had possibilities again. Like maybe I could go visit Helen next month. Maybe I could weed the garden without needing a sit-down every 10 minutes. One night, I got bold and added a pinch of cinnamon to the drink. Just for variety, I felt like a rebel. The flavor changed slightly. More mellow, a little sweeter. I smiled into my mug like I'd invented something. Maybe this is what getting older is about. Not settling, but reworking. Finding new ways to soothe an old body. Not with desperation, but with curiosity. And that's what this recipe became. Not a fix, not a miracle, just a small golden habit that said, you still matter. A way to say to myself every night, without fail, I'm still trying, I'm still here. The real change wasn't in the turmeric, it was in me noticing myself again. By the sixth day of my little experiment, something had shifted that went beyond flexibility or discomfort. Sure, my hands no longer screamed when I opened the window each morning. And yes, my knees no longer staged a protest when I rose from the couch. But the more curious change was that I was paying attention to my own movements, my own emotions, even my posture in the mirror. It had been years since I actually looked at my body with anything other than frustration. We get to a point where we stop seeing ourselves as whole people and start cataloging the malfunctions. There goes the hip. Here comes the shoulder. Watch out for the ankle. It becomes like reading a weather report, only you're the climate. But that week I noticed something beautiful. My fingers, usually stiff as broomsticks, flexed easily while I buttoned my shirt. I didn't have to sit down to do it. I stood calmly, watching my own hands like they were finally remembering how to move gracefully. No more morning massage ritual, no more warm towel wrapped around my wrist just to hold a spoon. That morning, I even picked up a book I had abandoned months earlier. Not because it was a bad book, just because holding it had become a chore. I cracked it open again. I read for an hour. My thumb didn't lock up once. Old school wisdom says, a body in motion heals faster than a body at rest. But they don't tell you how to get the courage to move again when everything hurts. That's what changed. Not just the pain, but my fear of it. The fear had been worse than I realized. The kind that made me overthink every step. Going downstairs had become like walking on ice. One slip, one misstep, and I imagined a headline in the local paper. Elderly man defeats gravity, loses fight with staircase. But that sixth day, I walked through the backyard, slowly, yes, but without holding the wall. I looked down less, looked forward more. Odd fact, flamingos can stand on one leg for hours without moving. I learned that while reading a trivia calendar Helen sent me. Apparently, it costs them less energy than standing on two legs. And here I was, a human, nearly falling over tying my shoelace. Life's sense of humor is brutal sometimes. That same afternoon, I swept the front steps, something I hadn't done in months. The broom handle felt firm in my hand. The motion of pushing it back and forth was oddly soothing. I even managed to bend over and scoop the dustpan without groaning loud enough to startle the neighborhood cats. That night, during my golden milk ritual, I added a small slice of fresh orange peel. Just for scent. Just to see what would happen. The kitchen smelled like autumn, warm and citrusy, and I thought, maybe this is what a second wind feels like. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just peaceful. Now, there's still an academic debate around whether curcumin impacts neuroinflammation. Some researchers think it might help slow age-related brain decline. Others say it's still too early to tell. I don't know about all that, but I can tell you this. I felt clearer. My thoughts were less foggy. I started remembering little things again, where I left my slippers, the name of Helen's neighbor with the annoying parrot. More importantly, I started remembering me, and not just me with the pain, me before the pain. The version of myself who used to sing while making toast, who used to sit on the floor while playing with the grandkids instead of perching stiffly on a chair. That version wasn't gone, just buried under years of stiffness and doctor's appointments and whispered complaints. When I called Helen that evening, I told her what I was feeling. She let out a small gasp, then said softly, "You sound lighter." I told her she was right. I was lighter. Not weight-wise, though if turmeric burns calories, I'll take it, but emotionally. It was like I had set something down that I didn't know I was carrying. I went to bed that night with a full heart. I didn't wake up once. Not for the washroom, not for the pain, not to flip the pillow to the cool side. I just slept. That morning, I stood at the kitchen sink watching the kettle boil, and I whispered, "Thank you," out loud. Not just to the turmeric, but to myself, for not giving up, for trying one more thing, for stirring a cup of warm yellow milk night after night, even when I didn't know if it would work. And maybe, just maybe, for beginning to believe that healing doesn't always need to roar. Sometimes it just needs you to pay attention. I didn't realize how far I'd come until I found myself standing in the middle of my living room, arms raised above my head, holding a box of old photos. Let me explain. The top shelf of my hallway closet hadn't been touched in ages. Not because I forgot it existed, but because anything higher than shoulder level was off limits. Stretching up that far used to feel like playing Russian roulette with my back. But on this particular Tuesday morning, I felt brave. Maybe foolishly so, but brave nonetheless. So there I was, fingers grasping a dusty box marked Summer '96, and it wasn't until I lowered it gently to the floor that I realized I hadn't hesitated. No pain, no second guessing, no internal negotiation, just movement. I sat on the rug, surrounded by photographs, some curled at the edges, others faded to near sepia. I saw myself standing next to a barbecue in a pair of absurdly short shorts, holding a drink, laughing at something probably not that funny. My knees looked stronger then, my posture less defensive. And yet, for the first time in a while, I didn't feel sad looking at those pictures. I didn't feel like I'd lost that version of me. I just felt glad I got to be him once, and maybe in smaller ways, still was. They say the body knows when it's being listened to. I believe that now. The more I gave myself attention, not anxiety, not pressure, just attention, the more my body responded, not in dramatic, acrobatic ways, but in steadiness, in comfort, in confidence. Old school wisdom says, the body speaks in whispers before it screams. I wish I'd listened to those whispers years ago. Maybe I wouldn't have pushed so hard, ignored so much, medicated my way through pain signals that were actually requests for kindness. What surprised me most was how my energy changed. Not just physically, though I did start walking a little farther each day, but emotionally. I found myself humming again while washing dishes. I started answering phone calls instead of letting them go to voicemail. I even made a grocery list with something other than just milk and bread on it. Odd fact, bees flap their wings about 200 times per second. It's so fast that it creates enough lift to defy their chunky little bodies. That's how I felt some mornings, like I was finally generating just enough momentum to lift my own weight. I also started noticing things I hadn't in a long time. How the morning light spills across the kitchen floor, how the birds in the tree outside my window argue like siblings, how the wind whistles through the cracks in the window frame like an old harmonica. None of that changed, but I was paying attention again. There's a fascinating debate in health psychology circles about something called somatic mindfulness. The idea that being aware of your body in the present can actually reduce the intensity of chronic pain. It's not about denying the pain, but acknowledging it gently without judgment. Like saying, "Yes, I see you," instead of, "Why are you ruining my day again?" I started trying that in small ways. When my knees ached, I didn't curse them. I sat down, breathed, and rubbed them softly, not as punishment, but as support. When my hands felt tight, I warmed them in a bowl of water and told them, "You've done so much. It's okay to rest now." It sounds silly, maybe it is silly, but it helped. Because when you're 84, you don't just want to feel better, you want to feel seen. That's what this turmeric ritual gave me. A new kind of attention, a relationship with my body that wasn't adversarial anymore. I wasn't angry at it for hurting. I was curious, patient, supportive. It helped that I'd built up a rhythm. Every night, same drink, same mug, same moment of calm. It wasn't therapy, it wasn't medication, but it was healing. Quiet, steady, loyal. And healing, as I'd come to learn, isn't always about return. Sometimes it's about renewal. Not going back to who you were, but becoming who you can be now. One evening, I walked out onto the porch with my drink, sat down in the creaky chair I'd avoided for months, and listened to the world. A couple walked by with their dog. The dog barked once at a squirrel and then trotted ahead, full of purpose. The woman waved. "Evening," she said. "Evening," I replied and raised my mug slightly in greeting. My back didn't ache. My knees didn't burn. My hands didn't throb. And for once, I wasn't just surviving the day. It's hard to explain the quiet confidence that comes when you start trusting your body again. Not trusting it to be flawless, mind you, but to show up, to meet you halfway. That's what these past few weeks have been about. Not transformation, not reversing time, just cooperation. I felt like I had signed a new peace treaty with myself. After years of negotiations, walkouts, and stubborn silences, we finally agreed to start over. But I know what you might be thinking. Was it just the turmeric? Maybe, maybe not. That's the honest answer. The science behind turmeric and curcumin is promising but not unanimous. Some experts call it supplemental, others call it inconclusive. There's a mountain of small studies, patient testimonials, traditional medicine records, and now even clinical trials. But like everything in the health world, it lives somewhere between fact and feeling. What I can tell you, without hesitation, is that something shifted, and I didn't imagine it. It wasn't just about my joints, it was about the way I moved through my day. I stopped wincing when I stood up. I stopped planning my schedule around where the chairs were. I started leaving the house more. Not far, just to the park or the grocery store. But that alone felt like a kind of liberation. Old school wisdom says, if you want the horse to move, loosen the reins. I think I'd spent too long pulling hard on my own limits, trying to force my body into submission. All it really needed was space and a bit of patience. And maybe, yes, a bright yellow drink every evening. I kept the routine because I liked who I became in the process. I liked that I was sleeping better. I liked that I was curious again. I even started experimenting. One night I added a drop of vanilla extract. Another time, a cardamom pod. Every tweak made me feel like I was part scientist, part barista. There's something deeply empowering about taking your health into your own hands, literally. I wasn't waiting for a doctor to write me another prescription. I wasn't clicking around for the next magic supplement. I was making something, stirring, sipping, listening, every night. Odd fact, turmeric has been found in ancient Indian burial sites, preserved inside urns for over 2,500 years. It's one of the oldest known medicinal spices. Think about that. Thousands of years ago, someone else was likely preparing a drink not too different from mine. Maybe for pain, maybe for peace, maybe both. And here I was, all this time later, part of the same lineage, same root, same ritual. One evening, I told my neighbor Joyce about it. She's 79, still drives like a maniac, and walks 5 kilometers a day. She listened with her eyebrows raised, then said, "If that yellow goop helps you smile more, I'll drink a bathtub of it." I offered her a cup the next evening. She sipped it cautiously, then shrugged and said, "It's weird, but I kind of like it." 2 days later, she texted me at 9:15 p.m. "Made your witch potion. Hands less cranky." Coincidence? I think not. We laughed. But that's how these things spread. Not through lab reports, but stories. Sharing, curiosity. There's an open academic discussion these days about how modern medicine might better integrate traditional practices. Not just as backups, but as companions. I think that's the right direction, because it's not always a choice between pills or plants. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's the simple willingness to explore, without needing a definitive answer right away. I don't have the knees I did at 40, but I also don't dread the stairs like I did last year. I've started gardening again, just a few planters on the porch, but they make me happy. I planted basil, mint, and, yes, ginger. The turmeric is harder to grow in Canada, but I like the idea of it watching over its leafy cousins. If you're listening to this and wondering whether to try it, here's what I'll tell you. You won't lose anything by caring for yourself. Not out of desperation, but out of possibility. You don't need to believe in miracles. Just believe that your body deserves attention. That pain doesn't have to be your full-time job. Start simple. Use good turmeric. Don't forget the pepper. Drink slowly and listen. Not just to your joints, but to your own quiet voice that still wants to feel alive. Because relief isn't loud. It doesn't come with trumpets or confetti. It's a quiet revolution, a tiny nudge, a mug placed gently on the table each night. And sometimes that's enough to change everything.